This podcast deals with issues about LGBT families and trans-specific topics. We would love to hear from you and welcome your questions and comments. However, we will not tolerate any discriminatory language or hate speech, so please, just don't do it. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Coffee Break, presented by Our Life in Transition.
Okay, hello everybody. This is our third coffee break. I am Rachel, and I am going to talk to you today about being a partner of a transgender person. Full disclosure, I am still not drinking coffee. I dubbed these coffee breaks, and I have not yet drank coffee while I have recorded them. Today I am drinking a rum and coke. So, but it's lockdown. The world is topsy-turvy. Rum and coke is just as appropriate as anything else. So, don't shame me. The reason I wanted to do this episode is it occurs to me that bi-weekly, you listen to Shannon and I banter back and forth, and everything is wonderful all the time. We are a perfect or near perfect couple, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that, everything has been, perfect from the minute she came out and even before. I want to talk a little bit about, partners and their feelings and, a little bit about my experience. And just so that you have a little more honest look at how things actually are. So, I guess the first thing that I want to say is that it's okay to not be okay. When Shannon came out, there was a lot of stuff happening. And, we had a new baby, and everything was... It was a very emotional time, and I know that it sounds like we're just like, I just said, okay, great, so who cares? And that's not exactly how things happened. I think everybody ends up going through the stages of grief. I will say I was not shocked. I mean, I was shocked because it was like, okay, I want to transition. But we had already talked about these feelings of dysphoria and things like that before. So it wasn't a complete, blind side. And I kind of skipped over the denial because, as I said, we had kind of talked about this before. And I kind of figured that if it had gotten to this point, that it wasn't going anywhere. But there was a certain amount of pain. There was pain and guilt and at the upheaval that was going to occur, and a certain amount of anger and resentment at the upheaval in my life that was going to happen because of Shannon's transition. And Shannon's decision to transition. And that lasted a fairly long time. And I didn't do a whole lot of bargaining. We bargained a little bit about timing of when she was going to come out to everybody. Just so that, mostly because I was trying to avoid the upheaval interfering with pre-planned stuff and things like that, which maybe wasn't fair, but... And I mean, early on when she came out and said that she thought she might be gender fluid, and I thought, well, okay, well, we can we can make a deal about what that's going to mean and how much femininity she's going to show and when and things like that. And I didn't quite understand how it worked. And then when she said, no, I'm transgender and I want to transition, that kind of flew out the window. And then it became more about bargaining about timing and things like that. And then, there is a fair amount of depression. I struggle with depression to begin with. So, I continued to struggle with depression. And then, finally you get to acceptance and maybe the world hasn't ended and maybe there's a path forward. And you have to figure that out. And the steps of grief in anything, and this included, are not linear. You don't go from one to another, and then it's done. Grief sticks with you, and you sometimes experience everything at once, and sometimes you think you're okay and you slip back into depression, and then sometimes you go from acceptance to bargaining to... It's wibbly wobbly. It's not linear, and it's not something that necessarily just goes away. So this is something that most partners struggle with for a fair amount of time, and even, partners who have been dealing with it for a long time sometimes cycle back around. And so if this is you, this is normal, and this is what everybody experiences, or what most people experience. You are not abnormal. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with feeling some grief over things changing. I grieved the loss of the familiar appearance. I grieved the loss of the status quo, which was, working pretty well for me. I grieved the loss of a dad in my daughter's life, and that's okay. I also had a fair amount of resentment, and I think a lot of people do when you're dealing with a partner who is starting to transition and things like that. You're often dealing with a fair amount of their mental health issues, and sometimes there's a lot of different stuff tangled up in, it's not just dysphoria, it's dysphoria and depression and dysphoria and anxiety, and dysphoria that causes depression and anxiety and depression that have nothing to do with dysphoria. And they're dealing with their own grief cycle to an extent. They're dealing with, bargaining with themselves, and do I really want to transition? Do I not want to transition? How is this going to blow up my life? And all of that stuff. I will very honestly say that I have my own mental health issues, and I resented having to watch over Shannon and make sure that she was mentally okay, because nobody was making sure that I was mentally okay. But now I was charged with checking up on her more because she was having a rough time. And also because she was having all of these problems with her mental health and trying to figure things out. She was unemployed. And so I was dealing with my mental health issues, the well-being of my child, Shannon's mental health issues, and being the sole breadwinner. And that was tough, and there was a lot of resentment. And also, I went back to work after our daughter was born because I had to go back to work. I got 12 weeks because that's what they give you. And then I had to go back to work. And Shannon was unemployed, so she got to be a stay-at-home mom for that very short time that my baby was a baby. And I mean, often she felt overwhelmed, and I don't know how much I think she ultimately enjoyed it, but in the midst of it, it was overwhelming for her, and it was a lot. And I don't think that she necessarily felt like she was equipped to handle that all of the time, but she did it, and she got to do it, and in the end, there are far more pictures of our daughter as a baby with Shannon than there are with me. And so that's something that hurts, and that I have resented, and that's something that I still deal with. And, there were lost plans, Now, I will say that at the point that we were at in our relationship, I wasn't expecting to have a child, let alone more than one. But we had our daughter, and not that I necessarily wanted another child, but the decision was taken away. That's it. And so there was a loss of future plans, that things that might have been on the table that weren't anymore, and things like that. And also, when Shannon came out, I found I was in more of a position to have to deal with other people than I wanted to be. Nobody wanted to ask Shannon the questions because that would be rude. Or they didn't want to talk to Shannon, period. Or they didn't know what to say or whatever. So I was the one that got all of the rude questions, all of the shitty backhanded comments, all of the, I had to deal with all of that. And I wasn't in a position mentally to do it. And I felt really bad that I wasn't given a choice to do that. That was something that just came along with the territory. So it was difficult, and it's still difficult sometimes, because I still find myself having to be the cheerleader, having to be the explainer of all things trans to people on the outside. I have to be the person who justifies my feelings. Why did I stay? And how do I feel? And what do we do? And none of that is really relevant to my daily interactions with people, but it still gets brought up, and people are still dicks, and I get to deal with that. And I get to deal with it a lot more than Shannon, because people will say stuff to me that they won't say to Shannon. And so, and I've gotten used to it, but I have resented being put in a position that I didn't want to be in. And I think, that's okay. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay to be like, this was not where I wanted to be. And it's also okay there's no time frame on when you're supposed to get okay with this. There's no time that's, well, if 6 months down the line you're not hunky-dory, everything's fine, then you should leave. There's not a time frame that says, well, it's been 2 or 3 years, you should have gotten over that feeling of loss. Because there's also a fair amount of things that come up with your identity. When Shannon started to transition, well, then I had to think about, well, what does this mean? If I stay, what does it mean for me? If I don't stay, what does it mean for me? And, who am I as a person? There's a fair amount of very uncomfortable self-examination that it makes you go through, and which people don't necessarily want to go through, and don't necessarily, maybe they do want to go through, maybe they need to go through it, but they don't necessarily want to be thrust into it on someone else's timeline. And unfortunately, when a partner comes out, often you don't get to choose when you have to do that self-examination. You have to, or you have to decide not to, and then you have to, and deciding not to do that examination is its own examination. So, being a partner is not easy, and making the decisions that you make they're not easy decisions to make, and sometimes you get it right and sometimes you get it wrong, I think the really important thing, and the thing that has helped with Shannon and I will start this by saying I am by no means perfect. I often have problems with communicating effectively, but communicating is really the key here. Because I will say for most people, and I don't speak for all couples, I don't speak for trans people, I don't speak for their partners, but from my experience, most trans people do not want their partners to feel bad. And most trans people, when they come out, if they have a partner, are coming out because it's not sustainable for them to hide anymore, but they're coming out knowing full well that there's a possibility that they can blow everything up in their life. So it's not a decision that most trans people, especially trans people who come into their transition in adulthood, it's not something that they take lightly. And most trans people, I think, are very cognizant of their partners. But a lot of times, and I am a good example, a lot of partners get this information and then they are shell-shocked. And so the first thing that I do, and I think a lot of people do, is shut down. Like, I just don't want to talk about this right now. I can't deal with this. This isn't happening. Which is not the most effective thing to do. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have to shut down to protect yourself and kind of mentally wrap your head around things and then, and then move forward and see what you're going to do. But I think as a partner, the most important thing to do is to say, I need help with this. I need help understanding what's going on. And that's different than saying, I need you to justify to me why this is happening. That's not the same thing. But I need help to understand what it is you're feeling, where I fit in, and how we go forward. And it helps to be specific about what you're feeling. I'm mad at you. Well, great. Are you mad at me because, I didn't do the laundry? Are you mad at me because I didn't get you a good birthday present? Are you mad at me? What are you mad about? Well, I'm resentful of the fact that things have changed in my future and I didn't get a say. It's fair to be mad and resentful of that. But talking it out specifically and saying, look, I'm having these feelings. And you know what? There's probably going to be absolutely nothing that your partner can do about it except say, I'm really sorry that you're feeling that way. And I know that there's nothing that I can do. But if you want to talk. But you need to be specific about what you're feeling so that your partner isn't guessing. And it's really important to not play the blame game. Because from talking with Shannon, I know that her coming out was preceded by months and years of misery and trying to survive and trying to be for other people. And so it's not constructive to say, you blew up my life. Because A, your partner knows that. And B, they also blew up their own life. But they did it so that they could continue to survive. And I think that the real important thing is that you realize that your partner isn't doing something to you by trying to live as themselves. And I think you don't get there in a day. You don't get there in a day, you don't get there in a week. Sometimes you don't get there in 2 years, and sometimes you get there and you think you're there and you live there for a little while and then you go backwards. But it's not constructive to play the blame game. It doesn't help anybody in the long run. And, when you're trying to communicate your feelings, sometimes you don't have the words to say. Sometimes it's hard to say the words. Sometimes it's hard to say because you know that your partner is struggling. I know when Shannon is struggling, and it's hard for me to say, you're screwing things up for me in this way or that way or the other way, and I'm feeling bad because I want to take care of her. That's the person that I am, to my own detriment sometimes. But if you don't communicate, then stuff comes out in an angry way, and stuff doesn't come out at all, and you bottle it up and you stuff it down, and then some little thing happens, and then there's a huge explosion. Or sometimes, you don't want to be honest with your feelings, so you deflect. Sometimes I've known partners who even, will try and sabotage their trans partner. They'll make backhanded comments to make them feel like they can't transition or things like that it's not constructive. The point of all this is that as a partner, it's important to take care of you. And I say this with all, respect and kindness and not being a jerk at all. Nobody else is going to take care of you. When transition happens, the person who is transitioning has enough shit that they're dealing with. And not that they're trying to be callous or cold or selfish. Sometimes it's just not on their radar. And it's human nature for them to try and think of themselves and try and not necessarily have the energy or thought processes when they're in survival mode to worry about what is going on with you. Maybe that's not the way it should be. We can debate that all day long, but that's the way it is. And when people transition, you're going to lose people that you thought were great friends. You're going to lose family. And some of those people that you lose might be people that you relied on. They might be the people that you had coffee with, had a good heart-to-heart with. You don't know. You really don't know how people are going to react. And sometimes it's not the big explode, the big, oh my God, I could never accept that kind of lifestyle. Sometimes it's just people slowly slink away because they don't want to say anything, but they're uncomfortable. And so over time, you might actually lose more of your safety net than you do in the big initial announcement, just because people just have less time for you. It's shitty, but it is the way it is. So taking care of you taking care of you and recognizing your needs is the single most important thing you can do for you, for your family, if you have children, for your children, and for your partner. And sometimes that means therapy. Shannon and I went to couples therapy for a while, and that was helpful with communication. And to be able to recognize some of the resentments that we maybe had and talk through some of them. It may be couples therapy, it may be therapy on your own. I recommend both, because there are things that you're still going to be more willing to say to your therapist one-on-one than you are going to be able to say face-to-face with your spouse. And that's okay. And sometimes you need to work through the stuff one-on-one with your therapist before you can get to working it out with your spouse. You need to be clear about what you need, because your spouse or your partner is going to be clear about what they need. They're going to be clear about what they need in transition. And that's fine, and that's fair, and they should be. So you need to take a tip from them and say, okay, I understand what you need. Here's what I need in our relationship. Here's the support that I need through this process. You need to establish your own boundaries. If you're the one that's constantly answering the questions and getting the looks and dealing with the social, Shannon and I have been members of fraternal organizations. Shannon's no longer a member because she just decided that the path of least resistance was just to back away from that. I am still a member of a fraternal organization, and I get questions. I get backhanded comments. I get slights that I have to deal with. And it's important to decide for yourself what you're willing to take and where you're going to draw the line. What are you going to answer? What are you going to deflect politely? And when are you going to say, listen, mind your business? And you also have to establish boundaries. Those boundaries go for members of organizations, members of your community, members of your church, closer friends and family, and in some cases, immediate family. You know, you have to decide how much you're going to say, and how much you're going to listen to. And the earlier you establish that, the easier things will be. Because people will get the hint if you give them the hint in the first 6 months. And then 2 years down the line, they'll know when to shut up. And you also have to establish healthy boundaries in your relationship with your partner. You know, you have to talk about the uncomfortable things and make some decisions with that. You have to early on in the transition, you have to say, you know what? I'm not comfortable shopping with you yet. Or you have to say, you know, I want to be in on those decisions. You have to take it at your own pace, but you have to be clear about where you are. Because it's not fair to anybody to pretend like you're okay when you're not. It's not fair to yourself. It's not fair to your spouse. It's not fair to yourself because you're now stuffed into the lie that your spouse was stuffed into for however long they were stuffed into before they came out. Now you're the one that has to pretend all the time, which is not fair to you. Or you pretend really well and you're all right with that, and then one day it becomes too much and you say, hey, I'm not all right anymore, and your spouse goes, well, what the hell? Where did it come from? And they're blindsided. And the final thing that I'll say is this. Shannon and I have a pretty decent relationship. It's lasted a long time. We are committed to keeping it going right now. We are, both of us, very stubborn human beings. And so we're in it for the long haul. And that's good. That doesn't mean that it's the only right way to be. And it's okay to know when to say when. Because in the long run, misery doesn't help anyone. And if you come down to it and you have done your examination of yourself and you say, you know, I didn't sign up for this and this isn't where I want to be, then you have to be, for yourself, for your family, for your spouse, you have to be honest about that too. And I know several couples who have parted ways, and some more amicably than others. And I think a lot of how they parted ways had to do with how they dealt with this other stuff. You know, the people who didn't talk about their resentment, who didn't go through all of the steps of grief, who bottled everything up and then exploded, if they chose to leave, their relationship did not end well. It ended with anger and vitriol and terribleness. And I think that some other people who have done the reflection and everything and said, you know what, I'm not in this, I didn't sign up for this, and have talked it out, have ended up with relationships where, in some cases, they're still really good friends with their exes, they're just not married to them anymore. And that's okay. Not everybody is going to do the, oh my god, I can't deal with this, I want a divorce immediately. Not everybody is going to do the, I think I'm okay, but then later on, I decide that I'm not okay. Not everybody is going to be like, you know, this person's my best friend and I don't want to be married to them, but that doesn't mean I don't want them in my life. Not everybody is going to do what Shannon and I are doing and just sticking it out for the long haul. And there's no right or wrong way to be. The important thing is that you're making honest assessments of where you are for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your partner, for the sake of your family. You have to sit with your feelings a little bit and figure out where you want to be, and whatever decision you make is the right decision for you. And you shouldn't feel shamed into doing one thing or another. You shouldn't feel trapped. There is no right or wrong, and you should know that there is no right or wrong. But for better or for worse, the role of a partner of a trans person is one that a lot of us didn't necessarily choose. But it takes a certain amount of strength and resilience and self-discovery and all those other things to kind of decide where you are and decide where you want to be in relation to your partner and how you want to support them. And sometimes the best way to support them is to be by their side 24/7 and to go shopping with them and to do makeup tutorials together and, you know, whatever. And sometimes the best way to support them is to walk away. So my final word to partners is that it's okay to feel what you feel. Please don't think that because you listen to the podcast and we are, you know, awesome with each other, that it's always been that way and will always be that way. And that's the only way to be, because it's not. It's just our personal experience. And it's our personal experience after 2.5 years. It didn't get this way overnight. So it's a process, and it's okay wherever you are in that process. It's okay to be where you are. And, you know, I'm always here. Reach out if you want to reach out and you want to share, or you need somebody to talk to, or you want to know how I handled X or Y or Z or anything like that. You know, reach out, comment, send me a message. And in the meantime, enjoy, well, I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but keep quarantining or keep being in lockdown, keep staying safe, keep sheltering in place and doing what you're supposed to be doing so that we can actually leave our house at some point, you know, maybe before the 4th of July, who knows. At this point, I have no compunctions about when we're actually going to get out of here, but do what you need to do, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and Shannon and I will keep doing these little coffee breaks with some interesting little perspectives, and we'll continue doing our bi-weekly big episodes together, and we'll get through this together. So thank you for listening. I am Rachel, and we'll talk again soon.
This has been Coffee Break, presented by Our Life in Transition.
Our producer is Shannon McDill.
Our theme music is Silky Smooth by Jens Kiilstofte.
Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/olitpod. That's /OLITPOD.
Your support makes this show possible. Thank you.